next session, which is the DG MoS Port Policy Unit, I have with Remy Meyer, who is Deputy Head of the Unit, Ports and Inland Navigation. And he will highlight the policy context and the request of the Transport Ministers of 2014 as part of the Juncker investment plan to simplify the regulatory environment for investment and the links with port projects with the motorways of the sea. So Remy, you start, and then is Sarah here? Sarah or Brendan, you'll go on to Sarah. Remy.
Thank you, Brian, and good afternoon to all. That's a pleasure for me to open this session on how to simplify the permitting procedure for transport infrastructure projects, and in particular for projects in ports. Dredging to improve the navigability in the channel, expanding a ferry terminal, or building a rail connection in the ports are all transport infrastructure projects which require permitting procedures, so procedure to get the consent from different national authorities. And those procedures, if not properly managed, can be a source of additional delay, a source of additional cost, source of legal uncertainty. And this is why, as you said, Brian, the transport ministers in December 2014 adopted conclusions to stress that it is crucial to streamline those permitting procedures, and that streamlining those procedures is vital to accelerate projects and increase the confidence of investors. And the transport ministers invited the Commission first to take stock of good practice, and second to promote ways of simplifying the streamlining those procedures, and first, of course, the EU framework within which many of those procedures are implemented. Following that, the former Vice President Christopherson and the open coordinators, Mr. Secchi and Mr. Bodevik, produced a report which also emphasized the importance of simplifying the procedures for transport infrastructure projects, and more recently in the context of the investment plan of President Juncker, the so-called third pillar, to simplify the regulatory environment for investment. The Commission is engaged now in a reflection on ways to streamline and shorten the procedure for building infrastructure. So this is against this policy background that the Commission, DG MoS, decided last year to launch a study, first to better understand why the different permitting procedures can be quite cumbersome, and identify ways to streamline, to simplify those procedures. This study, which will be presented in a couple of minutes by Sarah O'Brien, covers all transport infrastructure, so not only waterborne transport infrastructure, but rail, road, inland navigation, inland waterways. And what is interesting is that this study is putting the focus on two specific types of projects. One is the cross-border projects, which obviously have to cope with more complex permitting procedure, duplication of procedure, more difficult coordination between the national administrations, but also a second type of projects, which is the waterborne transport projects. So projects to develop ports, or projects to create new inland waterways, which are projects which are also facing very specific complex procedure because of their proximity to the water. Because of their proximity to the water, that means more exposure to nature issues. That means also the application of additional legislation like the Water Framework Quality Directive, like the Future Maritime Spatial Planning Directive, which has to be transposed this year. And this is why we wanted to have a first discussion with the forum today. So this study that Sarah will introduce started last year. It will be completed in the autumn. The Commission will also dedicate a session on the 20 days in Rotterdam on the 21st of June on the matter, during which we'll be able to further discuss the possible follow-up of the study. And then we'll see from the Commission side how best to follow up this study. And the recommendation of the consortium, it can be by promoting the sharing of good practices. It can be also by explaining to member states that they should avoid to do gold plating, or simply by also simplifying the EU legislative framework, the various EU directives, which may be sometimes because of such difficulties. We have already started from our Commission side to simplify our state aid rules. So as regards state aid, this is a process, the simplification is a process which is already ongoing. But it can also be, this exercise could also lead, if there is a case for it, for proposing a new initiatives to facilitate the key strategic projects, the implementation of the key strategic projects of the Defense Supply Network, so those projects with a high cross-border impact. Before to give the floor to Sarah, I just would like to stress that the work of the project can only be successful if it can collect good feedback from the ground, so information from the stakeholders, and hence, Sarah, you have the floor to explain how the participants today can contribute to your work.
Thank you, Remy, and thank you everyone for allowing us time on your agenda to present the study and to seek your input into the study. So it's a brief presentation that I'll make now, and at the end I'll provide the opportunity for you to make comments now, or we can discuss other ways that you can provide comments by email at a later date. First, I'll introduce the study so you can see the progress that we've made and where this meeting today fits into that progress. And then we'll present the early results, and I'll finish with some questions where we'd really be grateful for the input of the forum members. So just in terms of the timing of the study, as Remy mentioned, the study started in September last year. And from that point until March, we were really in a data collection phase and focused on defining the problems that are faced in the implementation of 10T core network projects. So that phase included some initial interviews, country studies and case studies. Now we're in a second phase from say April to around June this year, which is an analysis phase. So we're seeking now further stakeholder input. And we're analysing the data we collected through the case studies and the country studies, and starting to scope out what potential options might be adopted to address the challenges in the implementation of these projects. And then finally, as mentioned before, in autumn we'll deliver conclusions. So we'll be looking at delivering recommendations and potential policy options that could be pursued to streamline permitting procedures and other procedures that impact 10T core network projects in terms of additional and unnecessary delay, cost and uncertainty. So on the case studies, we've conducted over around 4 case studies for the project, including these ones here on waterborne projects. Stephanie?
Well, I only have a few minutes to explain the slide a bit, so I will only highlight some of the issues and preliminary findings we are looking into in the case studies of our project. So we have the Seine Scheldt project, a cross-border project in Belgium and France. It's obvious that large river systems are highly complex and multidimensional and dynamic ecosystems, so that brings along difficulties in permitting. That's inevitable. The initially foreseen PTP process was not that easy to deal with, but there was also a good active communication strategy that was followed. So these are just a few examples. I'm not going that much in detail. The Danube project we are looking into is the Bulgaria-Romania cross-border section of the Danube. It's a cross-border project as well. The sensitive nature area where the project is situated, it triggers the Natura 2000 requirements. So it's not easy when preparing and implementing a large-scale project like this one. The complex legal framework for procurement is something that also was raised by the stakeholders we talked to. Then we have a closer, smaller project, the LNG terminal in the port of Rus in Bulgaria. It's a relatively new type of project, so streamlining the authorization process was not the easiest one. Then we have the Port Le Havre in France. Natura 2000 is an issue, but there are also some good practices. The stakeholder communication was handled well, and the governance structure that was set up is also a good practice that we are taking along. And from a port point of view, we're also curious about the impact of the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive. This case is an opportunity for us to take a closer look at that. And then we have the Weser River and Elbe River port access projects, including Bremen, Bremerhaven, and Hamburg. Well, in authorization processes, several issues have to be taken into account. First of all, I'm referring to the dredging activities. They trigger the Water Framework Directive and Natura 2000 requirements. And there are a lot of stakeholders and stakeholders' opinions that have to be taken into account. And there are some legal proceedings also that make it difficult for these projects to deal with their permitting procedures. So this is just an overview of some of the issues that we are taking a closer look at, just to give you an example of what the types of findings are that we are investigating.
Thanks. So I think the purpose in selecting these projects was to select a diversity of projects that represent a wide range of challenges, so that we could kind of consider a lot of challenges in our study. And then we've taken a similar approach in selecting these 10 member states for further study. So the purpose here was to provide a sample of challenges and good practices. It's not a comprehensive survey of practices in all 28 member states. But that being said, we don't exclude taking into account good practices and challenges that have arisen in the other member states that are not listed here. Because we get input from a lot of stakeholders through the different consultation methods that we have in the study. So we're certainly not excluding experiences outside of these 10 member states. Moving on to some things that might be more interesting to you, which are the early results of the study. So as I mentioned before, in phase 1 and in the case studies and country studies, we've been working on developing a problem definition, which will help us when we come to develop recommendations by ensuring that the recommendations that are delivered accurately and accurately pinpoint the specific drivers of problems and challenges in permitting procedures. First, in doing this, we are trying to develop an understanding of the permitting framework, and it's perhaps a bit broader than just permitting, because even though permitting does seem to be a key source of problems and challenges, often we find that the root cause of a problem occurs elsewhere. So it might be in the strategic planning of a project, right back at the earliest phases. It could be in aspects relating to the procurement of a project, so why a particular procurement method was selected may contribute to problems. State aid procedures can contribute to delay or uncertainty. And public involvement in the project from the earliest stages right through to the end can contribute to delay and cost as well. So the purpose here was to identify potential sources of problems, and so we can understand the scope of our study, but also understand the sequencing of processes and better understanding where interventions, at which point in time and at which point in the procedures can we intervene to make improvements. So in the paper that was circulated ahead of this meeting, you would have perhaps seen this problem definition. Now this problem definition here is not specifically focused on waterborne projects. Instead, this is intended to describe the challenges that arise in relation to all TEN-T core network projects. So here they relate to permitting, which includes assessment, environmental assessment procedures from SEA, EIA directives, water framework directives, and nature directives. Cross-border projects face particular challenges, as Remy mentioned earlier. Procurement practices can lead to unnecessary delays and costs. When state aid procedures are triggered, they can create delay and risk for projects, and that can be a particular problem in the case of ports. And then we have a catch-all at the end for waterborne projects, so we can go into that into further detail, saying noting that waterborne projects face unique permitting challenges. So this is obviously much too small for you to read, but it is in the paper that was circulated ahead of the meeting, I think it was last week. So in general for waterborne projects, what we find is that the unique problems that apply to the delivery of waterborne projects generally arise in the permitting phase. And that includes assessment, environmental assessment under the EIA and SEA directives, the nature directives and the water framework directive. But there are some additional challenges that apply to waterborne projects. So some waterborne projects, particularly ports, are linked to industrial developments, and therefore they may be subject to requirements under industrial accidents legislation. Dredging activities are particularly likely to raise environmental permitting issues. The Water Framework Directive, while it does apply, of course, to other projects, it's of particular relevance to waterborne projects and can add complexity and cost to these projects. And as we may see in the coming years, the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive can impact the delivery of maritime ports projects. So where I wanted to end with was a few questions where we would be grateful for your input either today or after the meeting today by email or by telephone interview conversation. So what we would be really interested in knowing is in your experience with projects, with the delivery of maritime projects, what are the key regulatory and administrative challenges that you feel contribute to cost, delay and uncertainty? What good practices have you experienced that reduce these risks? And what action could be taken at the European level to assist in overcoming these challenges? So I'd be grateful for any comments now or your thoughts at a later date as well.
Right. Any comments? Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Paris Sansobu from the European Dredging Association. I heard the word dredging repeatedly mentioned, but not always in a good connotation. So I will just make a small statement concerning dredging. The predecessor of Brian asked me, let's talk about the problem of dredging, and I had a long thought about it. And I came up with the following, that dredging in fact is providing solutions. So my guys are engineers, they work with biologists, with ecologists and so on, and they provide solutions to problems. What is the real problem? Is you want to expand a port in a densely populated and urbanized area, and you have no space, so you need to reclaim land on sea, for instance. If you want to maintain the navigational depth, because it's your legal obligation as an authority, you need to dredge. if you have an issue with contaminated sediments in your soil, you need to ask for a solution which we provide as environmental dredging. So there are different solutions, but dredging is one of them. Now, I'm not saying that we don't have an impact on the environment. On the contrary. Thanks to the European legislation on environment, there's a lot of things we do better. And one of them, and I'm ready to have, let's say, an aparté with you to go more in detail, I'm available for that, is building with nature. So this is a sort of a concept that was developed by a Dutch engineer in the 60s, and everybody thought he was crazy. What is the concept? Is using the forces of nature instead of fighting them. Forces of nature being defined as physical, like the streams, maritime streams, the winds, and biological, so ecosystem. So today it seems like an all-encompassing approach. At the time it was just totally crazy. So we are actively involved, when I say we, is my member companies are actively involved in this development. There's a lot of pilot projects because it's of course, let's say, state of the art. We know much less than what we are still missing as knowledge, but we are moving forward. I totally agree with your analysis about, let's say, delays and avoiding delays, and building with nature is providing an approach that helps shorten certain procedures. Why? Because it's involving stakeholders at an early stage. First of all, the concept of building with nature integrates nature into the design, so that your project integrates better into nature. And the cherry on the cake is, of course, if you manage to give also something back to nature. I take an example: you create a new salt marsh, or you restore salt marsh in your infrastructure project, nevertheless. And this means that you are delivering a service to society, because you're building an infrastructure that has a purpose. You are also delivering something to the economical side, and you are also delivering something in the ecological side, which is, let's say, the 3 pillars of sustainable development. So philosophically it's perfect. In practice it's more complicated because we lack knowledge and we are building it. So here again I have a lot of people involved in projects. Everybody is scared of the precautionary principle, but one declination of it is adaptive management. So adaptive management means that we don't know, but we don't need to stop the project for it. We can start the project, build the knowledge, and at a certain point that is decided by all parties, we look at what is happening. Are we happy? We continue. Are we not happy? Why? Adapt the design, change the methodology. We're not happy at all, you stop. And adaptive management goes along with adaptive monitoring. So you are measuring something, but is this something meaningful? So you have to adapt your monitoring during the project to measure exactly what you want to be able to control. And we mentioned the Netherlands, and I stop there.
Yeah.
Sorry. So in the Netherlands they have merged the infrastructure department and the environmental department. And most of the time what I've noticed, the issue is a dialogue between these two entities in most member states and at European level. And forcing them to talk is often bringing an integration of objectives. Thank you.
Isabel, you'll not be as long, I'm sure.
Sorry.
Good afternoon. My name is Isabel Rieckpost, and I speak on behalf of the European Seaports Organization. I would like to say that we really support this study because when ports are preparing for infrastructure projects, time is money in a way. This whole permitting procedures can be, it's a period of uncertainty towards the investors, towards the ports. And so it's very important that even if we support always the aims of these procedures, that these procedures do not take unnecessary time. What we also see is that there is sometimes a mismatch between the the planning of this port infrastructure, and then which is a long-term procedure, and then in fact the users of this infrastructure, the demanders of extra infrastructure, the users of the port who are in a much more market structure and want to have quick decisions and quick developments. So to optimize that and to look where it could be optimized, streamlined, I think it's a very useful exercise. We see that there is a focus on cross-border projects. Ports, in fact, are not in itself, and port projects are in itself not really this really physical cross-border project, but the effect of port projects is certainly, and the added value is certainly cross-border, so we would like to see also to be looked at that. We will have an internal meeting with our members mid-June to look a bit precisely into the different procedures, the different problems and challenges that are currently existing and maybe that are similar in different member states, and so we will be very happy to contribute and pass this information or outcome of this internal meeting to the makers of the study and to the Commission. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm running out on time, but go on.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Ivan from the ports of Bremen in Germany, and we are very happy to be chosen for being part of this study, because this morning we discussed about not being on the European net, not being in the TEN-T network, and we don't have that problem with Bremen and with Hamburg. Our nice villages are very well on the agenda, but unfortunately, since the year 2000 now, we are in the process of deepening the rivers Weser and the river Elbe, and we have not made much progress. We are in the front of we have been in the front of the European Court of Justice, we have been in the front of the German Federal Court of Justice, and still the process is going on. We cannot say right now when we will be finishing, when the dredging will be finished. And just one little remark on the Super Bernard from Superport. He was talking about the 16,000, 18,000 TEU vessels. When we started in the year 2000 with the procedures, the planning procedures, thousands of pages of papers, we were looking for vessels which were tremendously big, like 8,000 TEU. Nobody could imagine such vessels. And we are still in the process with 8,000 TEU vessels, even if 18,000 or 20,000 TEU vessels are now plying the waters. And there was no Water Framework Directive in the year 2000 when we started the procedure. And that, of course, that is a big, big trouble, I think especially for Germany, because you were also asking for a good practice, for a good example, and the deepening of the river Scheldt, obviously it worked. So we should probably a little bit look to our neighbors. But in fact, for being part of the study, this is very, very helpful. We hope to make it a bit more clear to be such a long time in the procedure. Thanks a lot.
All right.
Good afternoon, I'm Jean-Pierre Gallec from the Port of Le Havre, and I've been also involved in the study. Just a short comment. In France, we used to say that if 50 years ago it took 10 years to implement a new project, 3 or 4 years were dedicated to studies and procedures, and 6 or 7 to works. Today, the same project would last 13 or 14 years, and the works only 3 or 4 years. So just calculate the duration of studies and procedures today. And this trend is still going on. That's why we're very pleased that you have taken up this issue and that you try to make procedures simpler, more consistent, more secure, more efficient, more reactive, for the benefit of the EU development without spoiling the environment.
Sir, is there anything you want to add? Just to reiterate, you can send in your comments to Sarah or Remy anytime, so, you know.
Could I possibly make one more comment, Chair, please? Craig McCarthy from the UK Department for Transport.
Rob?
I can understand the thoughts and principles behind this, and I think in terms of looking at the delays for planning permission and permitting, I think it's very useful. In looking at your analysis of the various delays, I think from a UK perspective we can probably cancel out the procurement aspect, other than where there's a skills shortage for infrastructure development. I think we could probably cancel out state aid as well, given our industry is largely a private sector industry without government subsidy. But however, I would agree that in terms of delays to permitting and project development, that some of the legislative requirements, the EIA, Habitats Directive, Water Framework Directive, these are things that we do see adding material delay to projects. I'm not saying whether they're a good thing or a bad thing. I think they're probably a good thing, but inherently they do add time and complexity to a system. They are firmly embedded in the UK planning system, and that is for all projects. Now, in terms of what this is looking at, obviously it's looking at with a 10T focus on permitting of these 10T projects. That, as I can also see, is a positive thing for the EU as a whole, because these projects have material value and added value to connectivity and cohesion across the EU. But I think the same symptoms probably replicate themselves across all port development projects, not necessarily those that are 10T. So if, and it's good to see acknowledgement that EIA and other things do add complexity and delay, but I would caution against recommendations, and I would be concerned at recommendations that seek to set up a two-tier system where 10T projects have a different system applying for streamlining of permitting, and other infrastructure projects and other port projects that may be of equal but slightly different economic value and benefit to A, the member state, or B, the EU, but happen not to be on a 10T project, are left out of that. If there is to be a revision or streamlining of some of these procedures, I think that could be more widely applied.
Sarah.
Thank you everyone for your comments. Just to reiterate that we'd be grateful for any submission of comments by email later, and I think we would also seek to arrange telephone interviews with a couple of you as well. So if you have any views, please do not hesitate to contact us.
Thank you. Now, Federica, you've got an aeroplane to catch, so if Ludwig is willing to swap, I'll go to Federica Monteresi, who's from wider MoS, and Federica, the floor is yours when you can get out the computer. And we will try very hard this time, Federica, unlike Athens, not to destroy your presentation by Jose trampling all over your cables.
Yes, I remember, Brian. Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to the second MoS Forum. Thank you very much for the work that you are doing for the consortium, and of course the coordinator Brian Simpson for the development of the detailed implementation plan. I like to present the wider MoS project, and specifically the work that we have done to the in the is not on the video on the screen. Don't check. Okay. Okay. Thanks. I'd like to present the work that we have developed in a wider MoS project, and specifically the effective maritime transport integration into the door-to-door logistic chain. Because in wider MoS, that is a project founded in the 10T program, we have developed several tools to make effective the connection between the motorway sea and the core network corridors. But before the presentation of a wider MoS project, I'd like to start with the context in where we are living today, and specifically maritime transport, where several changes are taking place. Specifically, the bigger ship, the bigger alliance between the shipping lines are affecting a lot the maritime transport. And in ports, we have a lot of change. We have to face a lot of challenges, because workers have needs to have new skills related to the automation issues. We have to face the throughput peaks. The terminal productivity is rising, the speeds, the faster handling, and the operators call for faster and efficient port interland connection. But at European level, we have a new context, because we have a new strategy, the digital single market strategy, and specifically the digitalization in transport that is under discussion in the Digital Transport and Logistics Forum is very important at this moment for maritime transport and for the topics that we are discussing also in the forum. When we talk about the digitalization in transport, we have to take into account several topics, and specifically the different actors and the different approaches that we have in the member states. Because it's true, we have different approaches, but we have the same needs in terms of digitalization. We have to take into account the low use of data from one mod to another and across countries. We have to take into account the no interoperability and the no harmonized message that is affecting the sharing information. We need new standards. We need to have interoperable system, but also interoperable platform, because today we are moving from system to platform. So the interoperability between platform, I think that is a new challenge. And stakeholders call for a data exchange platform where shipper, transport operators, services providers, and public authorities can easily share and access the information that they need, and in order to create new services, but specifically in order to offer better services for their customers. So in this context, wider MoS, that is a project focusing on the connection between the multiple sea and the core network corridors